Welcome to the What's Important Now broadcast. In America today, we are witnessing a cultural shift. This is the show devoted to the battle for the soul of our country. Join our host, Tom Sears, as he explains the issues of our day and join the fight to bring values and morality back. Let's join Tom now as he shares what's important now.
And welcome inside of What's Important Now. I'm Tom Sears. Thanks for being a part of our program. If you were listening on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, make sure you subscribe and then share with someone you know. That way you never miss an episode. And if you're listening on FM radio, don't forget you need to subscribe to a podcasting platform of your choice so that when we drop additional content that does not make it to FM radio, well, you're going to get it anyway. You can find all of our podcasts not only on your favorite podcasting platform, but also at legacylivingmedia.com. There you'll find not only our podcasts, but all of our resources. And if you decide to support the program financially, you can do so there. Also, our Legacy Living store, you'll find my books, recommended reading, and faith-based gifts to help support this ministry. Anything you purchase on the store supports the ministry. Now, this episode's question, and I think it's one that a lot of people are asking, either out loud or quietly, and that is the world up for another global war? From Eastern Europe to the Middle East, from Asia to Latin America, from the Arctic to the Caribbean, there's no doubt the world is shifting. Alliances are hardening. Military activity obviously is increasing across the globe. What we also see is, we have these long frozen conflicts that are seemingly beginning to heat back up, and nations that once avoided confrontation, well, they're now openly preparing for it. I think sometimes throughout the daily news cycle, we don't see enough or don't look past it. Sometimes, what's that old saying? If you can't see the forest because of the trees. Well, I think we're looking at the trees and we don't see that history is repeating itself, because history does teach us something very, very important. And that is that world wars never start all at once. They start with pressure. They obviously have power struggles, and they start with regional conflicts that seem to pull bigger players in. And you can look back, World War I began with an assassination, but the fuse for that war had been burning for decades. And then fast forward to World War II, it seemingly began with an invasion, but the warning signs had been ignored for years. And there's many historians out there that believe that World War II was still World War I, that it never really ended. And so when enough flashpoints ignite seemingly all at once, the world changes. And so on this episode, we're going to talk about exactly what's happening, where the pressure is building, why the world is repositioning itself, and what it means for our future. Because the truth is, there is a pattern that is seen before every world war. If you go back before World War I, Europe was this powder keg of alliances. You had arms races, you had territorial disputes, and empires were competing for colonies because of resources, because of prestige. Nationalism was on the rise. Military budgets were expanding and exploding, and leaders believed that war was unthinkable at that time in what they considered a modern and civilized world. But one assassination in Sarajevo lit a fuse that had been burning for many, many decades. And then if you look at before World War II, you had economic collapse after the Great Depression. You had national humiliation and resentment. You had political extremism on the left and on the right. You had territorial expansion by aggressive powers, and you had weak international leadership. And I just have one question for you. Does any of that sound familiar? I had a history teacher that said more times than I can count, those who fail to learn the lessons of history are then doomed to repeat them. During that time, Germany rearmed in violation of treaties. Japan expanded across Asia. Italy invaded Africa, and democracies hoped diplomacy would hold until it didn't. And so what that means is that history paints a picture that global wars, world wars, they don't just come out of nowhere. They show up, ladies and gentlemen, when major powers feel threatened, when seemingly smaller nations become like pawns on a chessboard, when there's economic pressure that continues to rise, the military posturing will increase and diplomacy will weaken. And I would argue, you decide what you decide, but I would argue that right now we're seeing all five of those things I just mentioned. Because what we know is, and again, this is a strong opinion that I believe that I would be willing to argue, is that the world is reorganizing itself into these power blocks. And again, we're not seeing the forest because we're only looking at the trees. But you have sort of the United Nations, the United States, and what's happening here. And then if you look, you have Russia, and Russia is sort of pulling people in as allies, China and its allies, and then you have Iran and its proxies. This isn't ideology anymore. It's power politics. Because every empire wants influence. And let's go ahead and be honest. That's exactly what we're talking about here. In many ways, and this won't be a popular opinion, and that's okay, because I never got into anything that I've ever done in my life for popularity. I'm not in a popularity contest. I believe what we are seeing is the rise of the American empire. I believe we are witnessing the rise of the American empire. That's not going to be a popular statement. I probably lost some listeners here because we're so caught up in the political landscape in this country. We've all taken sides. By the way, many of us have taken the side opposite of what the Bible says, but I want to stay in my lane today. But every empire wants influence. And every empire wants/needs resources, and that gives empires leverage. And then those interests of the various empires begin to collide, don't they? And when that collision takes place, ladies and gentlemen, there's only one thing left, and it's called conflict. And I believe we're watching the return of this great power competition. Something most Americans haven't lived through. I haven't. I've studied it. I've read about it. But I've been fortunate enough to be born during a time in America. Really, in many ways, some of the greatest moments of America have happened while I've been born. Not all of them, but a lot of them. I've known peace and prosperity. Although I'm witnessing the decline of that, I've lived long enough to see what peace and prosperity is and how it's slipping through our hands. But we're watching the return of this great power competition of empires, something that, again, many of you did not live through. We know that after the Cold War, many believed we had entered a permanent era of peace. Well, that era is over. The global system that was built after World War II, think about it, the rules, the institutions, sort of the norms, that system is cracking. The players in that system are repositioning. The language of deterrence is back. And whether we like it or not, so is the language of dominance. And the question, well, it's not whether the world is becoming more dangerous. The question is, how close are we to another major global confrontation? So I mentioned moments ago the flashpoints, seemingly where the world is heating up. Let's talk about those flashpoints. The places where this pressure is building. These are the regions where if there's one wrong move, if there's one miscalculation, or even one political decision, history can be changed forever. Obviously, you think about Eastern Europe and Russia. You think about Russia's war in the Ukraine and how it has shattered Europe's post-Cold War order. NATO has expanded, military budgets have surged, and European nations are rearming at levels not seen since World War II. But again, we see the trees. We're not looking at the forest. A lot of people going to be surprised. A lot of people going to be caught off guard because they didn't realize what was behind the trees. Here's another fact. Russia has aligned more closely with China and Iran, and Ukraine is being armed by the United States and NATO. No matter what rhetoric you see in the media, no matter what the sort of the script that's being followed in Washington, that is what is happening in our world. Russia, China, and Iran are beginning to align themselves, and the U.S. and NATO are supplying Ukraine with what it needs to survive. It's no longer just a border dispute. I hope we see that. It is actually a test of Western power. And you can also say Russian ambition. And then where does global influence come in? Wars that drag on, historically speaking, go back and listen, I'm jam-packing this into a 30-minute program, but if you go back and you look at wars that have sort of went on and on and on, they typically widen. Because why? Because weapons are flowing from somewhere, financing, funding coming from somewhere, alliances begin to harden, and lines begin to be drawn. History teaches us that prolonged wars, well, they rarely stay contained. And then you have China and Taiwan. And I'm going to say this. It's not going to be popular, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think with America's move in Venezuela, China will now feel more emboldened. Because China feels that Taiwan is part of its territory. And the U.S. considers Taiwan is strategically vital. So you have Taiwan manufacturers with, they are manufacturing the most advanced microchips in the world, which is, by the way, the backbone of modern technology and weapons and AI and global commerce. So Taiwan's pretty important. China wants them, and the U.S. can't afford for that to happen. And China has increased. Their naval patrols have increased. Their air incursions have increased. And their military exercises continue to simulate invasion. And so here is without a doubt what would happen. Any conflict there would very likely draw in the U.S., draw in Japan, Australia, South Korea, and of course the NATO allies. A war over Taiwan would be a world war in everything but name. We're not just talking about sovereignty here. It's about technological dominance in the 21st century. Again, we see the trees. Question, do we see the forest? Then you have the Middle East and Iran. Iran funds and arms proxy forces across the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq and Syria, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the Houthis in Yemen, and Israel remains on constant alert. The Red Sea has become a combat zone. Oil shipping lanes, don't forget resources. From the beginning of the world, it's been about power, land, and wealth. If you're paying attention, you can see the repositioning taking place now, because even in that part of the world, oil shipping lanes are under threat. Iran continues to seek nuclear capabilities. Israel continues to vow to stop that from happening. Of course, we recall President Trump bombing Iran, but if we think they're not going to continue that journey, we're wrong. If there's any direct Iran-Israel conflict, without a doubt, the U.S. is pulled in, and very likely Russia and China. The Middle East has never been quiet. They've never taken a break. But today, you could argue it's dangerously volatile. Then you have North Korea. Well, North Korea continues to test missiles capable of reaching the mainland of the U.S., and it's strengthening ties with Russia and with China, and reportedly trading weapons for technology. So you have North Korea being built up and held up by Russia and China. The Korean Peninsula remains one of the most military or militaristic regions on the face of the planet. And so, in short, a single miscalculation here could ignite a regional war that would, without a doubt, ladies and gentlemen, have global consequences. Venezuela. And we know that they have revived territorial claims over some neighbors. Guyana, a nation sitting on a massive offshore oil reserve. Russia and China both have investments in Venezuela. The U.S. supports Guyana. And then, as it relates to energy and ideology and influence, there's a collision. Latin America is no longer geopolitically quiet. And of course, with the recent move of President Trump ordering some call it kidnapping, others call it capture of Venezuela's president, that now has become a hotbed of issues. And President Trump has come out and said, listen, it's about the oil. He recently held a White House meeting with big oil executives, and it's very clear it's about the oil. And that kind of bolsters, well, not kind of, it does bolster the point I'm making on this program of about a repositioning and aligning as it relates to not only geographically, but also politically, and a struggle or battle for resources. Then you have Cuba. Cuba remains a strategic post 90 miles from Florida. It, of course, has close ties and maintains those ties to Russia and China. It's no coincidence that President Trump recently said, next up is Cuba. And then, of course, he references Greenland, and I'll get into that in a moment. But history tells us that Cuba is pretty important, and all you have to do is go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so what this teaches us is that the Caribbean still matters. When you're thinking about alignment geographically, Cuba matters. And then you have Greenland and the Arctic. The Arctic is becoming sort of this new frontier. Because part of it is because, melting ice has opened up some new shipping lanes, and we know that there are untapped resources that are now becoming more accessible. And so Russia has already built military bases across the Arctic. China calls itself a near Arctic power. The U.S. has reactivated Arctic defense commands, and Greenland sits at the crossroads of a possible future global trade war. And so the next Cold War literally may be on frozen ground. Now, when you step back and you look at all of this together, you see a world that is not stabilizing, but rather repositioning. And those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them, because this is what the 1900s looked like, and this is what the 1930s looked like. Global tension does not announce itself, it accumulates over time. So are we sleepwalking into something bigger? Again, can we see the forest through the trees? Hey guys, I wanted to tell you about 2 books that I've written that come straight from the heart. The first is Into the Deep, Pursuing Your Purpose by Pursuing Intimacy with God. It's about leaving the shallow waters of faith and diving into a life of true purpose and closeness with Him. This book has been a multi-year project. Started it about 5 years ago, worked on it from time to time, but this past summer was able to step away and really put everything together. The second book is While It Is Day, Living with the Eternal Urgency. And in it, I share the importance of living every moment like it matters for eternity, because time is short. The foundation of that book is a sermon that I had preached not that long ago from John chapter 9, verse 4. Both books are available right now on Amazon. Just search Into the Deep or While It Is Day by Tom Sears, and I believe you'll be encouraged and challenged to go deeper with God. All right, let's get back into it here on What's Important Now. Before we dive back into whether or not the world is repositioning itself for World War III, which I know is an absolutely lovely thought, I want to give a shout out to all of our listeners and say a big thank you. Good Pods has us rated as a top 25 podcast in the Christian category. And on the monthly chart, we are top, you could say 50 in both all-time and monthly chart. As a matter of fact, in the monthly chart for historical, we are number 31. So I wanted to say, hey, thanks. Continue to subscribe and share. Really important. Again, that's important for our FM radio listeners as well. I'm running out of time here on FM radio, by the way, so I want to get back to it as quickly as I can. One of the most I asked before we took that short break, are we sleepwalking into something bigger? One of the most dangerous moments in history is when people believe war is impossible. And if you think about it, before World War I, Europeans vacationed, they traded, they believed civilization had outgrown or outlasted war. Before World War II, leaders believed diplomacy had restrained dictators. And what history teaches us is that peace maintained by hope alone is fragile. So right now we're living in a world where military spending is at record levels. Arms races are accelerating. Nuclear arsenals are expanding. Cyber warfare is constant. And now space has become a military domain. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not in peacetime. We are in a strategic pause because great powers are preparing for the next era. And they're preparing for great danger. The more weapons you build, the more likely you are to use them. The more alliances harden, the faster conflict will spread. And the more divided nations become internally, the weaker they become externally. That is just a fact. History is full of moments when the world stood at a crossroads and didn't realize it until it was too late. And so the world is not just moving towards conflict, it's actually rehearsing for it. So real quick, what does this mean for America? It means America must think clearly again. It must have leadership that matters, diplomacy that matters, and strength that matters. History shows that weakness will invite aggression. Confusion will invite escalation, and division will invite exploitation. A nation divided at home is vulnerable abroad. And I would send you back to our previous messages, that compares us to the Roman Empire. We are actually living in the most complex geopolitical moment since World War II. That's my opinion. And yet much of the public is distracted, exhausted, or disengaged. Ladies and gentlemen, the world's not slowing down, it's speeding up. And history never waits for people to catch up. It doesn't happen. So, as we wind down, let me leave you with this. We should not live in fear, but we should be aware. Because prepared nations will deter war. Naive nations will invite it. I believe the rest of the world is sitting around and watching the division in the U.S., in America, and they're just waiting. Because in a lot of ways, we're just tearing ourselves apart. The world is shifting into a new era. And every generation must begin, ladies and gentlemen, to decide whether it will rise to the moment or will be shaped by it. I believe the coming years are going to define the century. And the question is whether or not we'll be ready. History is not going to ask us if we're comfortable. It's going to ask if we're wise. And wisdom begins with seeing the world as it is, not as we hope it should be. Thank you for joining me on this edition of What's Important Now is the world sliding towards another global war. If this program matters to you, please subscribe on Spreaker, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. Be sure to visit legacylivingmedia.com for all of our podcast media resources and the Legacy Living store, where every purchase helps support us. And again, thank you for listening. We really do appreciate it. And so I leave you with this. Fight the good fight of faith. Contend for the faith. There is a cause. It does matter. And it is important now. May God bless you. May He keep you. May His face shine upon you. God bless.